Hello and welcome to Gateways to Healing. I'm Scott McGuffey, clinical hypnotherapist and your host. In this program, we look at how you can utilize complementary medicine with Western medical services. This is a program in which we introduce and explore the four gateways to healing: mind, body, spirit, and community. Today, we're going to look at emotions. And to help me do that are my friends from Integrated Healing Arts. And let's introduce them. On my right is Paul Sipsey, a spiritual counselor, teacher of meditation and process acupressure, and author of the book Healing Your Rift with God. Paul is also one of the original founders of Integrated Healing Arts and co-founder of Pathways to Self-Healing. Also joining us is Dr. Jean Gillespie. She holds a doctorate of education and is working towards licensure as a clinical psychologist at Integrated Healing Arts. Her areas of specialization include working with artists and writers to facilitate their productivity and creativity. And also with us is Dr. Nick Zerpolo. He is a licensed psychologist who specializes in medical psychology and mind-body healing. He is a former teacher of centering and awareness techniques and is also a founding member of Integrated Healing Arts. Hi, Nick. And also with us is Rosalie Mangan. She is a clinical hypnotherapist and a human services counselor who includes body therapy in her work with clients. She is also one of the original founding members of Integrated Healing Arts. I want to thank you all for being back. You've all been in our program before in one way or the other. It's a pleasure to have you. And now we can just dive into emotions. Now, one of the interesting things that I noticed when I was working on this program is that we talk about the four gateways to healing: mind, body, spirit, and community. And then suddenly something pops up like emotions. And isn't it interesting how that's the way it seems to happen, is that we always forget about emotions. So I think this will be a great opportunity to kind of dig in there and explore what's going on. So my first question is, what are emotions? Paul, why don't you start us off?
Really good. Yeah, you know, when you mention that about emotions, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's somehow it always tends to be forgotten. When we hang out with spiritual circles, somehow emotions aren't exactly okay to have. When we're around mental services, we tend to find the same thing, or around the body. And yet, I really consider the emotions to be the spark plug of the whole being. A mind is very good to make plans about how to run the life. The body is excellent for carrying it out. And yet, what really sparks the whole thing is the emotions. We say that in poetry or drama, almost anything. If a person was out without passion, then it doesn't seem to spark.
And you know, that's interesting because it seems like the one area where emotions flourish is in the arts.
Yes.
But yet it still comes from human beings.
Absolutely.
Well, let's ask you, Dr. Zerpolo, your view on emotions. As a psychologist, you work a lot with the mental energy awareness.
Certainly, yeah. I think a couple of things about emotions. One is that emotions are thoughts in the body, experienced in the body. And another is that emotions are what produce motion. They are, as Paul said, the spark, the motive force, motivation, and they are part of our survival equipment in that they're kind of radar. When you go into a room with a bunch of people, you can feel, is this safe, is this not, is it warm, is it cold? So they're part of our survival equipment.
You know, you mentioned something about how it puts our body into motion. Now, Dr. Gillespie, you work with artists. How do you work with emotions with artists? Because we were just talking about them.
Well, I think emotions, as Paul said, are the spark, and the emotions impact all of the areas that you mentioned before: the community, the body, the mind, what was the fourth?
The spirit.
The spirit.
Yeah.
Okay. And what the people that I work with, and everyone actually, we all learn these rules about emotions within our families. And the rules, as we grow into adulthood, either work or they don't. And a lot of people that I see are the ones for whom the rules are not working. They've learned certain things about their emotions and it's not working. For instance, we learn what we can express, how long we can express our feelings, how we express our feelings, who can express feelings. And it seems to be a gender definition in a lot of ways, that men are allowed to express anger. So they express that freely, but have difficulty expressing other emotions and every other emotion gets folded into anger and expressed. They feel frustrated, they express anger. Feel sad, they express anger. So for men, that's a problem, and with women, it's often the opposite problem, that women socially are allowed to be sad. So all of our feelings get folded into sadness. We get frustrated, we cry. We get angry, we cry. We're happy, we cry. And so there's a lot of confusion because we're expressing something that it doesn't reflect what we're really feeling.
You know, I think it's a great observation of what I think we all experience. Well, let's just back up a bit now that we kind of have a clear definition of the perceived problem. Let's go to, what is the source of emotions? What do they serve in purpose? Rosalie?
I think they're a really good source of information for us. They bypass the intellect, which wants to tell us only what we want to hear.
It's kind of like love is blind.
Yes, right. But they have their own means of telling us when something is right, wrong, difficult. Even the positive emotions, those that we think of as positive, joy and compassion and love, tell us something. Even though our mind might be saying something else, we can't deny this energy that's moving inside of us and wants a form of expression. I think that emotions also tie into the spirit. When the spirit of us feels stifled, the emotions come up as a way to unblock that suffocation.
So also like what Dr. Zerpolo was saying, it puts us into motion, but it also gives us a signal on how we should move then as well. Is that what you're saying? So it's kind of a dual function. Nick, did you want to add something to that?
No, I was just going to say, I was thinking about what Jean was saying about how men and women are restricted by cultural roles to what we're allowed to feel and express. And this is a kind of thing I use sometimes, which is a list of a whole bunch of emotions, really a chart. And I often have people take a look at that and allow them to find out what their emotions actually are. What are they feeling? Because often they're unable to identify something beyond anger or sadness or fear. So we want to add to the dialogue.
So once you add to the dialogue, what purpose does that serve in our healing process?
It tells us where we are, what location. We can't move forward, backward, wherever if we don't know where we actually are on the map.
So
it's a locator.
emotions really act as a first shot of awareness for us.
Absolutely.
And the
Paul,
more specific you can be about what you're feeling, the more appropriate response you can make.
now, Paul, I know you deal a lot with the spiritual connection. How does the awareness and emotions work together with that?
It's very, very close in a lot of ways. In fact, I'm always amazed that people who aren't aware of their emotions also aren't aware of a spiritual feeling, because in effect, that is also a feeling. And so people who aren't aware of the emotions often aren't aware of the body either. They aren't aware of themselves and what's going on. And just as the emotions are a spark plug for the whole being, so are they a minesweeper. You know, they can detect within us what's going on. And all of us, I think, at Integrated Healing Arts or in holistic medicine, really do believe and understand that emotions can cause illness, things out of balance. And so when we work with holistic health, and we really believe in education as being a very important part of health, is by helping people to know what's happening in their bodies and with their emotions. We actually have an inner guidance system that can keep us on track, to keep us healthy. For example, if I'm feeling my stomach's in knots and I know my emotions well enough, and most people, I think we all agree, have terrible emotional vocabularies. That's why Nick's page is so helpful. You know, it's like, oh, I can have all these emotions, and each of them is a little different. And so when I feel into that knot in my stomach, I might feel fear, anxiety, or some other variety of that can be very helpful to me, like embarrassment, or those are very different in some ways.
So it becomes more of a specific director to a process in healing.
Yes, because I can, once I know that, I can begin to work with it in a way that's helpful to me. Maybe instead of just frightened, I might feel inadequate, which calls for, as you psychologists would say, or people who work with the mind-body, a completely different approach. you know, and yet it's all towards the integration and the wholeness and the well-being of the person.
And being integrated, your feelings and your body helps you to reduce the stress that causes disease and can impact him.
I think it's important to say, as these folks have been saying, that feelings, the word feelings means both physical sensations and emotional states. So we recognize the connection between the two by using that word. So we say, what do you feel? Paul might say, I feel this knot in my stomach. Okay, that's a clue. And then we can use the mind a little bit to help expand that. And as we know, we all know that emotions cause illness in many ways, or keep healing from happening. Emotions can also cause wellness. So we want to have people get more access to their positive emotions, both, I'd say, everyday emotions like joy and gladness and compassion, and also emotions that lead toward the spirit, such as reverence or awe. Those are very authorized. Objectively, they are emotions.
Well, this is a good point, and I wanted to bring this up. Why is it, I'll just open this up to the panel here, my big question is, why is it seems that we focus on the negative throughout the day? You can start off your day, and then somebody cuts you off on the freeway, and then it seems like we focus on those seemingly negative emotions that just ruin our whole day. Well, what's going on there?
I think I'd like to speak to that. I believe pain gets our attention. Negative emotions create pain somehow. They create frustration. So we're well aware of those negative emotions. I think one of the reasons we don't recognize the positive emotions is we don't cherish them enough. When we have them, we sort of take them for granted. We don't really allow ourselves to, say, oh gosh, this is wonderful. Thank you for this great feeling I have today. We just kind of let that brush by. And then along comes something that upsets us, and then comes the pain again, and we pay attention to that.
Right.
I'd like to add a little to that. I think in the positive emotions, we're flowing. Things are moving along.
Right.
The negative ones are a snag, and we get stuck.
Yes.
And as
And
like
we'll
Rosalie was
stick.
saying, it's like pain. It brings our attention to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm a little confused here. We're talking about the mind, body, spirit, and community. So how exactly does emotions fit within that? Within the mind, body, spirit, and community as gateways to healing? Where's the emotions within that?
It's the vitality that moves people together and apart so that things happen in each of those areas. Jean?
Well, and in the community, as I was mentioning earlier, what the community supports and allows in terms of emotional expression is very important in terms of how healthy the individuals within that community are. If the community doesn't support the free expression of emotions and feelings, then it's hard for individuals in that community to be happy.
You know, and kind of putting some things together here, it just struck me the 1989 earthquake that we had here in the Bay Area, where we're all going along our own lives, and then suddenly we get an earth emotion, and it kind of wakes us up to something like that. And suddenly people, I mean, I just remember story after story of positive stories.
People pulling together and helping each other.
So in that regard, emotions are often about being open or closed. We recognize a sort of polarity about emotions. We say negative and positive, open or closed. And the more we open, the more positive emotion we have, the more things flow for us. However, there's some danger in being overly open. We call it wearing your heart on your sleeve, or being overly vulnerable. So we have to be careful about that as well. And so people tend to close up because fear is important. If we're going to survive, we have to have that. And those instances of pain are important, just as if we didn't have pain, we'd all be dead by the time we were 5 from playing with fire and whatever.
Or from falling in love and getting hurt.
Right.
Right.
Good point.
Can come from either end.
Rosalie?
I wanted to say something about when we suppress emotions, it does affect the body. But there was a study done that showed that when people suppress their tears, it affects their immune system. And sometimes they say the common cold is the body's need to cry. And so those things all are interconnected, intertwined. suppressing those feelings creates all kinds of trouble. And the way it affects us mentally, I believe, is if I'm angry and I don't have the opportunity to release that anger, then I begin to feel bitter or resentment. Bitterness and resentment will eat me up inside. And that's kind of where then forgiveness has to come in.
So I just want to clarify something here. As I understand it, what you're telling me is that emotions are kind of the glue that holds the other four gateways together, acting in kind of a double function?
I feel something like that, yes. It's actually mobility, as though it were water that were connecting the islands.
Oh, very nice. And you were going to say something,
I was
Nick, I'm
going to
sorry.
say, Rosalie was talking about how emotions get stuffed or blocked or so forth. And that's very important. And we might often have certain emotions, let's say anger, about something that happened. Perhaps it was something on the freeway. Perhaps it was something like pain happens. You have a pain condition. There's anger, but there's no target. What do we do with that? People tend to keep it stuck. So I've come up with something I call emotion aerobics. We know we should exercise our minds. We know we should exercise our bodies. We should exercise our emotions. And so we can do that by putting our face into the expression of a given emotion. There was wonderful research done about this at UCSF. It starts the neurochemicals going that go with the experience of that emotion. And also, we can do it with our voice. So if we're angry, we can just growl. And that in itself, we do that for half a minute. Usually we wind up laughing afterwards, but we also have released the emotion of anger that was tight in the muscles and the tension. And so we can do our own self-clearing that way.
Now, Nick, does this also help us define more clearly the emotions that we're missing, that we're just kind of glazing? You showed the sheet. So, I used to be a professional actor.
Good, yes.
And as we did these exercises, you go for anger, but it may not be anger that you suddenly discovered. It may be something more subtle.
Well, the emotions are
Grief.
connected. They are not separated. So
I see.
For anger to occur, there has to have been something that makes you angry. That was an offense of some kind, and it causes hurt. And the reaction to hurt is sadness. And afterwards, you may have a reaction of anger. As you were saying earlier, women have the sadness part, are not allowed to do the anger. Men just forget the sadness and the hurt, only talking about the anger. So there are these connections.
So as we exercise our emotions, if we take the responsibility of our own self-healing through our emotional aerobics, then we have a more clear definition of what emotion we have, which opens up our awareness to the healing process.
I'd like to speak to that. I think what we're really about then is bringing awareness into the body-mind, and certainly a very important part of that is emotions. As we pointed out, it's the center peg. It affects everything. And once we do, it's very important to go through another step, what we call acceptance. A lot of people will get angry at themselves for having an emotion, or critical of themselves for having an emotion, because as you pointed out, Jean, we're not supposed to have those. A woman's not supposed to be angry. A man's not supposed to cry, and so we'll tend to criticize ourselves. So it's important to accept it, and then we begin to work with them. And every spiritual tradition has a way to work with emotions. I prefer actually the Buddhist tradition more than any other. And it's in Buddhism we have ways of actually being with emotions, feeling into emotions, and working with them in whatever ways necessary. And also there's a grand tradition of developing positive emotion, developing compassion, which is very, very helpful to not only the individual but the world community, developing love. For others, and methods for working with anger and other emotions that can poison the system, such as resentment.
And Rosalie had brought up just a few moments ago about the act of forgiveness, and if anybody would like to address how forgiveness works into acceptance.
I think that forgiveness is so difficult for most of us because the offense is, we feel we've been wronged, and how do you forgive when you've been wronged? But the bottom line is forgiveness is a lot more like letting go of it. The damage is done to us personally when we hold a grudge or when we're resentful or bitter. Forgiveness sets us free. Then now I can flow with life again. I'm not carrying around this big heavy bag that keeps me stuck. I wanted to say some of the ways that people do some of the techniques for people releasing their anger, for instance. I heard a great one. A therapist had told a young woman he was working with to go home and pound nails into a 2x4, and she would feel better. So she went home and she pounded this piece of 2x4 full of nails. She didn't feel any better. So she called him up and she said, I don't really feel any better. He said, all right, pull them out and pound them all in again. She said, I didn't pound them in as hard the second time. But it's getting, see that those emotions get stuck in our body. That's energy stuck. And when we can do something physical, it releases the energy from the body. It really helps stomping on cardboard boxes or breaking cheap plates somewhere. It takes some physical activity to free ourselves from that.
So this is where we get into the gateways, where it starts to, you can do it physically, mentally, spiritually, through community.
And also personally and interactively. I mean, there's how you deal personally with your own emotions and how that affects how your emotions affect your interactions with other people. And for me, that's where assertiveness comes in, learning the skill of assertiveness so that you're not reacting either passively or aggressively, that you're reacting appropriately in ways that are good for you and good for the other person.
And Nick, you want to jump in?
I was going to say a little more about mobilizing emotion. One of the main ways that societies have to do that is music. It moves us, and different music has different emotions. It moves our feet, it moves our heart. Some of it appeals to the head in later times, not in earlier times. And music is one of these arts that helps the emotion move. And it's nonverbal, so it bypasses all those cognitive sensors that we have, and it gets us to move. And when we listen to somebody talk, sometimes we say, well, I heard the words, but the music was different.
Yeah.
And we can distinguish between the two and know that that's more real.
So it sounds like, coming back to the beginning, we're talking about positive and negative emotions. It sounds to me like what you're all telling me is that negative emotions are good and part of the healing process.
Yes.
And the positive emotions are good because they keep us healthy. Is this?
Negative emotions will not be denied. If you try to repress them, they will pop up somewhere in your life in some way that's going to impact you.
They're all information. And if we ignore some of the information in our environment, we bang into things.
And I think it's probably a mistake on our part to label anything positive or negative in that regard, because they're all just emotions, and it's really a part of accepting them, their place in the entire holistic being, and being able to work with them. I find sadness absolutely delightful myself. It's one of my key emotions, and I've just learned to fall madly in love with it.
Yeah, and because it seems like we fall into that trap where you try to eliminate sadness, grief, fear, anger, and you end up like a piece of Play-Doh.
I think we also run into people who don't have any control over their emotions.
Oh, yeah.
And they're drowning in them. And we have to be able to help them to see how they can get some control over that. It needs to be expressed, but it doesn't need to be splattered all over everyone.
Well, you know, this has been so much fun. We're just almost winding down. I just want to kind of dovetail off of that and just go down the line here and see what sort of suggestions you give to people to exercise healthy emotions. Paul?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think we mentioned it a while ago. But people have different people have different ways that are satisfying to them. I was thinking of one person who just could not get anything out of pounding pillows or going outside and kicking the wall or anything. But she said what really delights her with expressing her anger is hearing a sound. And she really likes it, like she dropped a dish. And everyone was just, you know, what happened, Mom? And she said, I like that sound. And so I asked her to go to a garage sale and pick up a bunch of dishes. And, and
Make lots of sound.
And she took them out in the garage, you know, and she takes them and throws them into the garbage can and breaks them and gets a great deal of joy out of it. And it gives her good feelings, but at the same time, she's not violating some sense within her that says, oh, I'm doing something wrong. You know, you can't actually find much wrong with breaking a 20-cent plate, you know, if it gives you $1,000 worth of good feelings.
And Jean, what suggestions do you have?
Well, as an artist, you know, I always want to suggest that people try to draw what they're feeling, try to see what it looks like, what color it is, how big it is, what the texture is, what would overcome that feeling or what would diffuse that feeling for them. And also the template of assertiveness, learning what that is and how to use it in your life.
Great. Nick?
I'd say in general to move with it and let the emotion move you. Emotion produces motion. That's how the word is constructed. So let it move your face into the expression of an emotion and hold that for half a minute. Let it move your voice, not words but just the sound. Use music, move in a dance way so that you can get looser and find out what emotions you have.
And Rosalie?
I think for people who find it very difficult to express their emotions, journaling is helpful because it's sort of private, but it allows them to tap into what's real with them if they will use that for that reason. Also, dreams, if they follow their dreams, they will begin to get some information about emotions. Emotions show up in dreams too. Sometimes they're compensatory. If we can't express them, boy, we get volcanoes erupting and hurricanes happening, and that still is like a release of energy.
And I was just thinking of something that's come up in almost every program we've done of Gateways to Healing, is just moving the energy with breath, to work with the breathing and to move it with the breath.
And that's an interesting point. Usually when we talk about that, we're really talking about a rather still breath down in the abdomen to stop the thinking mechanism and all that noise. But with emotions, we want a different kind of breath that's more breathy and has more vitality to it and more direction.
Great. Well, we're almost there at the end of the show. Boy, this just flew by. Had a lot of fun. I want to thank my guests, Rosalie Mangan, Dr. Nick Zerpolo, Dr. Jean Gillespie, and Paul Sipsey back with us again. And I'm Scott McGuffey, and I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight, and catch us next time on Gateways to Healing. And till then, here's to your health. Oh, great.